Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja. We got a great Ask a Ninja from a gentleman in Middleburg, Florida. He wants to know, can crawl space encapsulation or crawl space repair be done in phases? I'm going to give you my opinion on what should be done first and how to do it, especially if you're on a limited budget. Stay tuned. If you're new to Crawl Space Ninja, we talk about everything related to crawl space encapsulation and waterproofing and indoor air quality. We hope you'll subscribe to our channel, ring that notifications bell, follow us on Facebook, make sure you check out our DIY store and our franchise opportunities. So this is from Derek in Middleburg, Florida. I have a crawl space that currently has a vapor barrier attached to the bottom of my joist, so it is overhead. When you're in the crawl space, I have a semi-functional vapor barrier on the ground as well, but it does not cover 100% of the ground. My question is, my crawl space has a bunch of vents. Given the current situation of vapor barriers, is it a good idea to seal the vents in my crawl space to start with? If so, should I seal off all of my vents at this point? Ultimately, I want to tear down the overhead vapor barrier and re-insulate between the joists. Then I would like to DIY encapsulate the entire crawl space. Not sure when the rest of it will happen due to time and finances, so should I shut off all my vents knowing my plans? Okay, Derek, let's unpack some of that. Number one, let's talk about that vapor barrier attached to the joist of the crawl space. I do not like any kind of plastic attached to the joist of the crawl space. It has a tendency to trap moisture between itself and the subfloor of the living space, okay? So the worst thing that could happen is if you ever get a leak from above, that plastic is just going to create a lot of wood rot, fungus, and different things like that. But being in Florida, probably very humid, so once humidity gets into that space, it's really hard for the humidity to back out of that space because it's trapped between the plastic and the subfloor of the living space. So I would take that plastic down immediately, all right? I don't think that sealing the vents without dehumidification is a good idea. I would probably leave it in the way it is now until you can afford to put a dehumidifier in that space. I would rather you, phase one, take the plastic off of the subfloor, seal up all the vents but one, make sure you have that active ventilation system blowing that air out of the crawl space, and install a dehumidifier. Those are always the first phases we look at because I would rather control humidity and moisture first than worry about insulation or vapor barrier or whatever. You should be able to add a powerful enough dehumidifier once that plastic is removed to potentially dry out any subfloor moisture and possibly dry out the insulation. Unless it's just totally soaked, then I would also remove that insulation that's between the subfloor to speed up that drying process. Having a vapor barrier partially covering the ground is also a problem, but I would still focus on dehumidification. Your dehumidifier is going to run a lot more having exposed earth, but plastic is typically the last thing that's done in crawl space encapsulation. It's kind of like when you put down the flooring in the living space. You don't put down the carpet first and then have the contractors put up the drywall and paint, right? So flooring is always the last thing that's done. So number one, take out that plastic. Don't seal the vents until you have a dehumidifier purchased. I would always recommend a commercial grade dehumidifier like maybe the E70 or the E80, depending on what size crawl space you have. If you want to check out our DIY store, we've got what sizes they rank up to as far as what you should do to control moisture. You are in Florida, always humid, I'm sure. So make sure you maybe get a more powerful dehu. So if you're rated for an E70, maybe bump it up to an E80, or if you're rated for an E80, maybe jump up to an E100. And by the way, the number is pints per day. So the E70 does 70 pints per day and so on. So that would be the first thing I would do. Number two, as I mentioned, if your subfloor insulation is moist, or dripping or anything like that, go and yank that out. I'd rather get rid of the water than worry about energy efficiency at this point, because if you get a mold problem up in that subfloor, you're gonna have to yank it out anyway. So let's try to do everything you can to prevent mold from taking hold in that crawl space, and then we'll worry about energy efficiency and all that stuff later as your budget allows, okay? The second thing I would, or the third thing I would do is if you have any standing water coming in, you didn't mention whether you do or not, but if you do, of course, make sure that's part of that phase as well. Install a full perimeter trench inside the crawl space. Make sure it goes to a sump pump, that water's being pumped out. I assume you could be in a sandy area. So, you know, sand likes to, that water table is going to rise up a little faster than, say, us being in clay. If you're dealing with a lot of sand like we do out in Wilmington, North Carolina, and in Delaware, we have a lot of sand issues. That water just likes to move real quickly through that sand. So make sure you got a couple of sump pumps if needed to get all that water out. And the last thing I would do is install a vapor barrier. Make sure you encapsulate the entire crawl space. If you're going to do this as a DIY project, I recommend you check out our crawl space encapsulation guide that we have in both video form and also on our blog. Those will take you through those steps that I just mentioned. I'm Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja. We hope you make it a happy and blessed day, and we'll see you later.